no, 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 no. Please, please. Ah!
I'm getting worried, Alex. You're getting...
Directed and co-written by Michael Cassie, we are talking No Tears in Hell. And this is a 2025 serial killer horror thriller actually based on true events. Now, the real events actually happened in Russia. There was a killer known as the Siberian Ripper who was convicted of 4 murders but was suspected of killing upwards of 80. Now, the movie is a story based on that real case but moves the action from Russia to Alaska. And we have this guy living with his mother. Young man living with his kind of elderly mother, and we learn through flashbacks that, you know, he's had somewhat of a messed up upbringing, which has obviously led him down this path. But on top of that, there is sort of destitution. There is kind of like a very kind of poor standard of living, a lot of people living on the streets and things like this. So poverty is a real issue here. Now, this young man and his mother are not quite on the street level. They are actually in an apartment, but they are living on the breadline. And this kind of messed up upbringing, which has led this young man to become a serial killer, and the kind of the pressure of poverty leads him to both be a serial killer and then use those bodies as sustenance, turning him and his mother into cannibals, and also necrophiliac goings on as well. Basically target homeless people, destitutes, vagrants, because they believe no one will kind of miss them, and it's only when they end up kind of like going a little bit further outside that kind of realm of people that the trouble starts for them. What will happen? You will have to watch the movie and find out. So I'm not familiar with exactly this Siberian Ripper case. I'm not going to pronounce the name of this Russian guy, Alexander something. So I'm not quite sure how closely this follows the actual kind of story of this true life event, albeit I know this is now taking place in Alaska rather than Russia. But it seems like relatively, sort of grounded in some respects. So what can we say that I think works in this movie's favour? If you are a fan of true crime thriller horrors, then I think you might like this one. It's a pretty dark movie, and it gets quite sort of shocking at times without being mega explicit. It is somewhat explicit, but I do think they try to have some restraint in the kind of like the gore and the kind of the torture sequences, but still giving you enough information where you understand the kind of the context about what is going on, and showing you enough that it will kind of like make you feel uneasy and horrified about what you're seeing without being an out and out kind of like gore flick. So I actually kind of think they got the kind of the balance quite right in being shocking, but not necessarily being exploitative, if that makes sense. I think it's quite a fascinating story, and you can kind of see the pieces falling into place about how this kind of guy ended up, like he did. You know, the relationship between him and his mother, who isn't in herself directly abusing him, but she's allowing him to carry out certain acts which leads him down this kind of path, and he's getting abused through other means, as to add to this. So it's an interesting dynamic, because she's kind of quite overbearing, because she has to take care of her son, and they have this kind of symbiotic kind of relationship. So I found that sort of pretty interesting. Luke Baines, who plays our kind of serial killer, I think does a good job of making him seem unhinged and very kind of creepy. You know, and how he's kind of luring his victims and going out sort of targeting these kind of like these homeless people, taking advantage of their kind of desperation for, you know, basic kind of materials to live on, and food and cigarettes and things like this. So he has a kind of almost like a young Jack Nicholson sort of quality about him in a way, in the way he's kind of sort of portraying this kind of messed up individual. You know, good face acting, you know, effectively, and things like this. And you know, it's being it is a true crime story. It's pretty kind of like it's scary to think about. The movie's actually kind of quite well shot, and I think moving it from Russia to Alaska, I think, you know, it might lose something in, because you can imagine that this kind of level of destitution in Russia. Alaska, I don't necessarily know if it translates quite as well, but I still think it's filmed in a way where it's kind of believable to a point. And I gotta say, the kind of like the things like this set design and the production, for the most part, with one exception, which we'll come on to, is handled all pretty well. Now the acting, I'm going to come on to this again. There is an issue I have with the acting, although I don't necessarily think it's the actor's fault exactly. I think at least the physical acting, I think, is sort of fairly strong, and you kind of get the idea of where you know, obviously the intention is. And this is what leads me to what maybe does not work. Now, I actually think the acting comes across as somewhat poor on the kind of the dialogue sequences, but I do think there's a reason for this. I actually think the movie feels like, or at least to me, it's coming across like it's been quite heavily ADR'd, which is the process of re-recording lines, because perhaps the original dialogue spoken on location or on set wasn't of a good quality, so the lines are re-recorded. But it comes across as very obvious and has this kind of like artificial feel to it. And the line readings, that if they are ADR'd, or at least that's how they seem, don't feel like they're quite present is in the situation. And as such, the dialogue feels unnatural because it has this kind of like artificial feel to it. But at the same time, I think the end result of it was, when you're watching this film, the acting, at least the dialogue sequences, feel a little stilted because of this kind of unnatural, like ADR kind of feel to it. Now, I don't know if this movie, I'm presuming it was heavily ADR, because it really does feel like that. But some of the acting performances, because of this, just feel quite poor. The end result of it is that just the acting doesn't come across as particularly strong. Now, again, I know it's hard to say exactly how good the performances were from the actors, because that is what I think has happened. But nonetheless, the end result here is that the acting seems like not particularly great at times. This is why I give the proviso that I think it's not necessarily the actors on set's fault. I don't know the behind-the-scenes situation with it. It's just how that comes across. However it happens, it just comes across like the acting sometimes feels wooden and kind of unnatural at times because of that. I do think the movie's pacing is a little kind of slow, and it ends up dragging at times. He's a slow, methodical killer. He likes to torture his victims, you know, and a lot of this kind of is kind of drawn out, and it's the kind of there's scenes here where I feel the movie's pace just kind of slows down a little bit too much. But overall, I think if you like a true crime movie, and you don't mind a very much a darker subject, and it is a slow-paced movie, if you can get over this kind of terrible ADR, or at least that's how it seems, there's an interesting story here, albeit a very dark one. So it's probably worth checking out. It's an above-average film, even though it does have some shortcomings, I suspect. For me, at least, it's a 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think? Please leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.